立法會人力事務委員會就而家咧。
This is the panel on manpower. We have a quorum, and this is the appointed time, so I call this meeting to order. Item 1 on the agenda. Now, first of all, let me remind members that we're still in the midst of the epidemic, and yesterday we recorded over 1,000 new confirmed cases. So please observe the anti-epidemic measures. We're conducting this meeting via Zoom. Please use the appropriate background color. If you're an EC member, please use orange. If you're a member returned by FC, please use green. And GC members, please use purple. I'm sure you're familiar with the rule. And when you speak, please switch on the video camera. All right, information papers issued since the last meeting. That's item 1. 3 information papers have been issued since the last meeting. Please refer to the agenda for details. We have an information paper provided by the administration entitled Implementation of the Mandatory Provident Fund System, and also a letter dated the 25th of January 2022 from Mr. An Man-yu, suggesting items for discussion. And there is also another letter dated the 31st of January from Dr. Wong Yuen-shan, suggesting an item for discussion. And a couple of other matters. We've also received a submission from the labor sector, and also the services trade union has made a submission on Anti-Epidemic Fund 6.0. These 2 submissions were received quite late yesterday. After today's meeting, the 2 submissions will be forwarded to members for reference. Item 2, date of next meeting and items for discussion. The next regular meeting of the panel is scheduled for the 15th of March 2022, Tuesday at 4:30. The administration proposes to discuss 3 items. Let's project them on the screen. A. Review of the coverage of ex gratia payment items under the protection of wages on insolvency fund and the levy rate of business registration certificate. Mr. Chow Siu-chung raised this item in the February meeting. Now it's been included in the list of outstanding items for discussion. B. Review of the Code of Practice for Employment Agencies. And C. Creation of 1 supernumerary post of Chief Labor Officer in the Labor Department to head the registry of trade unions to strengthen the guidance, supervision, and regulation of trade unions. 3 items. Any comments? If not, then we'll discuss these 3 items next time. We expect to spend 2 hours on these items, so the meeting next time will be adjourned at 6:30. The Secretariat will arrange a work plan meeting for myself, Vice Chair, and the Secretary for Labour and Welfare. The government will introduce a work plan in the coming year, and by then I will relate the items raised by members in the previous meeting and also other items we'd like to discuss. Members, if you would like to speak, please use the virtual hand function. So, item 3, briefing by the Secretary for Labour and Welfare on the Chief Executive's 2021 Policy Address. Please refer to the relevant papers, CB bracket 2, 76/2022, which is the Labour and Welfare Bureau's initiatives. And there are other relevant documents such as the Policy Address, the Policy Address Supplement, as well as the legislative proposals for the 7th term of the Legislative Council in the Policy Address 2021. I will now invite Dr. Law Chi Kwong, Secretary for Labour and Welfare, to walk us through the paper. And members, if you would like to speak, please use the virtual hand function to indicate so. Thank you, Chairman. Members, good morning. Now, the paper has been submitted to the panel, so I'll be brief. The policy address was delivered in October, and then the Chief Executive also briefed members on the work of the government in January. Now, there are initiatives relating to manpower, and one highlight of the policy address is abolition of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system, and we have arranged for the bill to be tabled in the Council on 23rd of February for first reading, either physically in the Council chamber or via Zoom. As for the handling of SP or severance payment or long service payment in the transitional period, details are set out in the paper as well as the policy address. There is also another measure, that is the establishment of a designated savings account scheme, and we will be briefing members on the scheme in due course. On promoting occupational health, safety and health, is mentioned in the policy address and the policy address supplement that we should strengthen risk management, and there is also the pilot rehabilitation program for employees injured at work. Very soon we'll be starting our exercise. There are also other initiatives, including review of the Code of Practice for Employment Agencies, review of the continuous contract requirement under the Employment Ordinance. Details are set out in the policy address. On talent list, in Chapter 7 of the policy address, we mention how we are going to refine the talent list to attract more foreign talents to come to Hong Kong. Now, for the Greater Bay Area Youth Employment Scheme, again, I won't go through the details, which can be found in the paper. There is also another initiative relating to reorganization of the government structure. In October, the idea was floated in the policy address, and details were provided to the Legislative Council in January. Today, the head of PICO is also in attendance to answer questions from members in relation to reorganization of the government structure. So that concludes my report. Thank you. Mr. Stephen Ho, I'll open the floor for members. Am I coming through? Yes. How many minutes? 4 minutes, questions and answers included. Right, let's begin. Thank you, Chairman, Secretary. There was a special meeting of the panel on manpower, especially in relation to abolition arrangement under the MPF system. This is the second meeting. The policy address provides longer-term policy initiatives. However, in the current situation in Hong Kong, in the coming year or even 2 years, we'll be focusing on anti-epidemic work. However, there aren't many measures set out in the policy address, especially under the Labour and Welfare Bureau. Many workers may be out of job soon. So in terms of labor protection, the government has to strike a balance. Now, there is a paragraph on promoting occupational safety and health. Perhaps they have been negligent. Not many workers have been wearing masks, and recently, for cross-boundary lorry drivers and delivery workers, some of them have been infected because of not wearing a mask. And on further investigation, we understand that some illegal workers are involved, and that actually happened in other sectors as well. So, first of all, I want to know whether the Labour Department will take action to tackle both problems so that more jobs can be reserved for locals. Now, on not wearing masks during work, Is it that you will leave the enforcement action with law enforcement agencies? What is the Labour Department's approach to tackle the problem? Finally, in terms of other support measures, I suppose other members will be asking the Anti-Epidemic Fund 6.0. The past approach is to dish out subsidy directly to employers. Now, on this occasion, I'd like to know whether a certain proportion of the fund will be dished out directly to employees instead. Another question. I suppose face-to-face contact will be reduced from now on, and if we have work from home arrangement for civil servants in the long term, will there be other measures, labor measures rolled out to enhance your performance? Because in staying home you might not be working. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I don't think members' points raised are directly related to the policy address, but I'll see if the Commissioner for Labour could take his question on dealing with, say, illegal employment. And about Anti-Epidemic Fund 6.0, I'm afraid today I'm not in a position to disclose details because we are still ironing out the details at this final stage. The Chief Executive, however, explained herself very clearly that in this new round of anti-epidemic fund, the focus will be on employees. Now, Chief Executive quoted some figures. Some 60% of the fund will be dispersed directly to employees. So I suppose when the relevant funding application paper is ready, members will have more information. We are still doing our preparatory work at the moment. Now I'll defer to the Commissioner for Labour to explain the point on illegal employment. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Member. On illegal employment, it has always been the government's concern, not just during the epidemic. We need to mount joint operations to tackle illegal employment, especially the Immigration Department, the Labour Department, and if necessary, the police force. We take a multi-pronged approach. We act on intelligence, we have raids, and we also target certain districts. So let me reassure members that we are all concerned about illegal employment. It's not just about the epidemic. They are breaching the conditions of stay and they are eating away the job opportunities locally. So we'll continue to take a multi-pronged approach to tackle the issue. The other point raised by Mr. Stephen Ho is that now many civil servants are working at home under the special work arrangement to fight the epidemic. In the last wave, we also implemented work from home arrangement, so we have a similar experience. Now we hold job fairs. We held job fairs previously, but now it's difficult to hold face-to-face job fairs. We are not going to relax our efforts, however. We're going to hold online job fairs, and judging from the last experience, this approach was well received. And on this occasion, we'll continue to make good use of information technology and optimal use of our resources to strive to provide greater support to the public in terms of the services provided by the Labour Department. Chairman, may I continue? I have some other questions. Well, Mr. Stephen Ho, I think there is a technical glitch here. You'll see that the timer didn't stop. In fact, here in the meeting room, I can see the timer. Well, but I said 4 minutes questions and answers included, and now you've spent 5 minutes 48 seconds. Let's see if you have a second round.
Well, I just want to raise just one more point. Well, those questions are not actually unrelated to the policy address. The policy address is for the whole year. But if they don't, the policy address doesn't address the problems we have. Well, I've been talking about the illegal employment in the vegetable distribution business. And therefore, because of the illegal employment situation, just tracing the context during the epidemic will be difficult. That's what I was trying to say. Members, You may want to use your own stopwatch to time your speaking time, because during the Zoom session, you may not be able to see the clock. I will remind you when the time is about over. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Secretary. First of all, I want to talk about paragraph 21 of your paper. The government has decided to take over the importation of talent from the Security Bureau. That's a wise move, because in the past 10 years or so, the business sector has been talking about the difficulties faced by the Immigration Department in administering such schemes, because they have to scrutinize the companies concerned and whether the talents they are trying to introduce are those needed by Hong Kong businesses. Well, they are professionals in other fields, so it's difficult to ask them to take up this side of the duty. I think we should find a solution to the mismatch of manpower in Hong Kong. On the one hand, we need to introduce talents that are urgently needed, and on the other hand, we need to protect the employment prospect of Hong Kong workers. So that's a good attempt to address this. Paragraph 16, the review of the minimum wage rate. We all know that in the latest round, the government did not heed the public opinion, and it was decided to freeze it this time. Well, you are very good at numbers, Secretary. It said that 73.3% increase, the cumulative increase is 73.3%, because you are comparing with the pre-minimum wage era. Do you know that at that time, for fast food chain, they hire people at $8 an hour? Of course, if we compare those wage rates with what we have now, is of 70% plus in terms of the extent of increase. Of course, it's true. Let me give you more figures for your reference. In the past 10 years, the minimum wage rate has increased from $28 to $34.5. At the same time, local GDP has increased by 39%. Nominal wage rate has increased by 47%. In other words, for the grassroots in the employment field, they are not able to share the fruits of our prosperity, and they are not even able to match the average wage increase of the average worker. In the discussion of the Minimum Wage Commission, a very ludicrous point was raised. It said that the consensus was to freeze the wage rate. But actually, the three labor sector representatives all said yes, all said no. They objected to the freeze. So my question to you, Secretary, is that are you going to consider having annual reviews of the minimum wage rate so that people will have a chance to get a raise? Are you going to get a better mechanism for determining the way forward? May I remind members that you need to comply with the speaking time limit. Otherwise, there will be no time for the Secretary to reply. On minimum wage, the current review is still ongoing. I very much hope that employers and employees and labor representatives would discuss the matter and come to a consensus. instead of having remarks such as that, I would rather have a freeze if the increase is not substantial. I hope the two sides would mutually accommodative, will be mutually accommodative to each other. The outcome of the last time is, in my view, unfortunate, because we need to come to a will and submit it to the Executive Council. This discussion could not go on forever and ever. I hope everyone will cooperate. In the long run, how should we go about the review mechanism? That will be covered in the coming review. We'll learn from the experience, and we will come up with some analysis and submit the mainstream views to the community and to this council for consideration. Mr. Lim Zhen-sing. Thank you, Chairman. I want to know something about paragraph 10. And it is the cerebrovascular diseases in the work environment. That was because some cases and people asked for a review to be conducted. The OSHC conducted a review, and then they said that these diseases might not have any direct relationship with work. It may have to do with personal traits or lifestyle issues. And also, it suggested that the property management sector and construction sector employees should manage their wealth and such risks properly. Is that what you mean by having a review like this? And also, according to WHO, working for over 55 hours a week is overwork. Are you going to publish some guidelines on the regulation of working hours so that employees can pay attention to such problems? And also paragraph 12 talk about the review of the continuous employment contract definition. There were many proposals back some years ago. It's proposed that it should be 72 hours or 60 hours in a week, or instead of 4-1-4, it's to be 4-1-2 formulation. And also there should be a formula to be applied to part-time workers. The Labor Advisory Board did have some discussion, but nothing come out of it. Are you going to have some new proposals so that we don't have a repeat of what we failed to do last time? When we look at an issue such as occupational disease, we need to look at it from the medical and or scientific point of view. Can we come up with some guidelines on overwork or excessive long working hours? Of course, we can come up with some guidelines. Employers think that this is not timely because of the epidemic, and the employees are saying that guidelines are not useful. I hope the two sides would be willing to negotiate and discuss the relevant issues on the optimum working hours, and also to prevent excessive working hours. In the last term LESCO, there was a discussion. And looking forward, we are going to look at the possible ways of dealing with this. We are thinking about, such as instead of 4-1-8 formulation, we have we can come up with 72 hours in a month or something like that. We will have some proposals tabled later. All right, any supplement? And next we have Dr. Wong Yuen-shan. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Secretary. According to some studies, the government has been spending very little on on-the-job training for our employees. This year, if we look at the continuous education fund, the training, and the expenditure on ERB, they only account for 0.5% of the recurrent expenditure. And even if we include the one-off value-added love upgrade scheme, we're still lagging behind Singapore. Singapore spends 5.9% of the total recurrent expenditure on such topics. In 2021 policy address, it said that we should step up vocational training, we should train more talents in the service industry, the aviation industry, and professionals that can contribute to the Greater Bay Area development. And we need to look at the manpower situation of the 8 major industries. So apart from the list of talent, are there other plans to step up the local training programs so that we can increase the ratio, the percentage expenditure? And bear in mind that we are lagging behind Singapore and other countries. And then about on the restructuring of the government. Under the Chief Secretary for Administration's office, there is one on manpower planning. When this function is transferred to the Labor and Welfare Bureau, would it have any impact on the cross-bureau coordination of relevant programs? From what I've heard from the member, you have already mentioned the important considerations in the government restructuring program. And concerning some of the questions, such as ERB and other institutions, you know as much as I do in terms of the resources that they get. In the restructuring program, we hope that for manpower training, the LWB would be playing the coordination role. Although the service or the program may not be implemented by the LWB or departments under LWB. For example, occupational training. It has everything to do with manpower, so LWB will be looking or taking care of that. As for the future coordination within the government, well, the CS4A is always there for all government planning. As for the human resources planning, the current plan will be that the CS4A would continue to be responsible for coordinating the relevant bureaus and departments on human resources. And mention has been made about the continuous education fund. Some 3 years ago, we injected some funds into the CEF and at the same time relax or increase the level of subsidy by 100%. So we'll continue to look at the levels of the grant and the programs to be offered. Actually, we have seen some 60% increase in the number of training programs. you can, and many of them are conducted online. And many of them are related to the innovation and technology and land planning. And we would be monitoring the resource situation constantly. In the past 2 years or so, the LOVE upgrade scheme has also been improved.
Mr. NGAN Man-yu. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'd like to put a few questions on unemployment matters to the Secretary. First, about the LOVE upgrading special scheme. Many who are out of job have applied to under the LOVE upgrading special scheme. I'd like to know, after completing the course, how many candidates enrolled have been able to join the workforce again. Because as I understand, not all candidates complete the scheme. The second question is on employment or unemployment assistance. Now, Secretary, we understand that $10,000 will be handed out to those unemployed under the AEF 6.0. But I think that what's been exposed by the epidemic is that there is a problem with unemployment assistance or support for the unemployed. When are you going to kickstart the study? In terms of employees retraining, there are courses relating to employment, and usually there will be a follow-up period of 3 to 6 months to assist candidates in searching jobs, and there are also 3 to 6 months of follow-up period together with a test, and the success rate is about 81%, and that's a recent figure we've collected, and we will have to be very careful in gauging demand and supply, and how we provide sufficient training courses for those who are unemployed or those who have retraining needs. On support for the unemployed, in recent years, the Labour and Welfare Bureau have been looking into different proposals, and we've discussed a number of them. One important aspect you need to understand is that if in the long run we are to give an overhaul of the unemployment assistance regime, then we need to review the SP and LSP arrangements as well, because we have severance payment and long service payment, and basically this is in line with the severance payment and unemployment claim in other countries. We actually fare better than some other countries. So now the employers are responsible for severance payment and long service payment. If employers are required to pay for the unemployment support as well, then the sum would be quite hefty. At the moment, our priority is to consider the abolition of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system against SP and LSP. And at the moment, members may already find the scheme complex enough. And we have had a very difficult discussion throughout. And if we are to set up unemployment claim system, it will take years to come to fruition. But of course, we welcome further discussion from the perspective of labor and welfare. Unemployment is something that we're concerned with. Next, Mr. Horace Zhang. Sorry, Mr. Horace Zhang, you were put at the bottom of the list because your virtual hand somehow disappeared. You're back on the list. In fact, I raised my hand very early. I don't know why my hand disappeared. My first question is about reorganization of the government structure. Dr. Wong Yuen-shan already asked a question, and I'm not going to repeat this question as the Secretary already replied. Now, I'd like to ask about unemployment support. Like Mr. Stephen Ho just now said in his question, now, in this current wave of the epidemic, many premises have been forced to close rather hastily, such as hair salons and barber shop. They didn't even have time to prepare. And the employment mode in Hong Kong is that we have a lot of self-employed workers. We've had 5 rounds of the anti-epidemic fund. And all along, we see the focus of the labor and welfare policy on protecting jobs. In fact, we've been appealing to the government repeatedly that more assistance should be provided to employees who are in dire straits, especially the self-employed persons and those casual workers, so that we can tide them over the difficulties. Now, the chief executive just announced that $10,000 will be disbursed to the unemployed in the Anti-Epidemic Fund 6.0, so that the funds could go directly to the hands of employees. Of course, Secretary, you would say that more details will be disclosed by the Chief Executive in the AEF 6.0. Anyway, I'd like to ask this question. It's close to my heart. Does it mean that, Secretary, in the past 2 years, in terms of the AEF strategy, you're going to shift to another direction in the sense that you're going to support employees directly now, and that this policy change is driven by a one-off exercise, and that no further consideration will be made of the regular unemployment support scheme? And what about those who have not been making MPF contributions, including odd job or casual workers? Secretary, can you tell us more about these issues? Chairman, well, I can only respond to Mr. Zhang's question this way. On employment protection, since 2019, after our economy had entered recession, we have been looking into this issue. Our conclusion is that at this stage, it may not be the most suitable time to consider a long-term regime to be set out, because, like I explained, if we are to set up this system, we may need to give an overhaul to the severance payment, long service payment system. Our top priority at the moment is the abolition of the offsetting arrangement under the MPF system. Meanwhile, during the government's consultation work, we also discussed these suggestions. I also advocated the idea back then. But the priority at the moment is the abolition of the offsetting mechanism. Anyway, on the AEF 6.0 and the arrangement, my answer remains the same. We are doing our best to finalize details. We hope that at the next week's Special Finance Committee meeting, we'll be able to answer members' questions. Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Chairman. The priority of policy initiatives in the policy address relating to the Labour and Welfare Bureau is abolition of the offsetting arrangement under MPF system. In fact, during Lunar New Year, at the last meeting, I mentioned my concern that is some people may wish to get sacked. Now, let me give you one example. I have one Mr. Chen and one lady working in a Chinese restaurant. They both earn $15,000 a month. Now, Mr. Chen has been working for many years. He has a very poor attitude, and he works very slow. He's rude to customers. So the boss may decide to let him go, as he has no incentive to work anyway. So for the 5% contribution, he may decide the employer will make contribution. Now for Ms. Chen, she can work all the way until retirement. So if we remain status quo, at the end of the day, you'll be able to get the employer's contribution under MPF. Under the new mechanism, what will be the arrangement? Now, it said that 1% will be devoted to the designated savings account, but the employers will have to pay 5% already. Say for these two workers who've been with the company for 5 years, and then now there's another Chinese restaurant, and one of them would like to go to the other Chinese restaurant. Now, Ms. Wong has good relationship with the boss. She has good attitude, so she just resigns and works for the other Chinese restaurant. Now Mr. Chen, who has a poor attitude, continues his way, wanting to be sacked. But because Ms. Wong resigns on her own, she's not eligible for the severance payment. Whereas for Mr. Chen, since he's worked for over 5 years, he could get 2/3 of the pay times 5 years. So for Mr. Chen with poor attitude, he could get the sum for 5 years, and then Ms. Wong remains to receive a $15,000 pay at the other Chinese restaurant. So Mr. Chen has persistent poor attitude, and yet every time he'll be able to get this sum, whereas Ms. Wong, with good attitude, would not be able to get the same amount if she moves from one job to another. Then by the age of 40, Mr. Chen will be able to get $400,000 more. And whereas for Ms. Wong, who changes job, should only be entitled to 5 years of pay. So in other words, if you are behaving well and if you change jobs, you don't get an incentive payment. Whereas if you adopt a poor attitude and get sacked, you get an extra. Say for those earning $22,500 more, they'll be able to get $75,000 a year and then in 10 years they can get $150,000. So how are you going to deal with the employment relations situation? Well, are you going to allow workers to act like Mr. Chen, and that they could just stay on the job for enough number of years, and then they would act in a way so as to get sacked? Just very briefly, if an employee engages in conduct at work in such a way to wanting to get sacked, at the moment there is no need to pay severance payment or long service payment. There is no need even to pay the payment in lieu of notice. The moral risk or moral hazard of this policy has always existed. In other words, an employer may want to avoid hassle by paying the LSP or SP as well. However, even without the abolition arrangement, the employees will pay 1/6, which is unfair to the employee. And I think in the future, employers will definitely modify their behavior so as to better handle employees who exploit the system. I understand that after introducing the abolition arrangements, the employers will be footing the bill for SP, LSP, and that employers will need to change their mode of management. I think that in that sense, there might be more conflict, and the Labour Department will provide assistance.
Thank you, Chairman. From what I've heard, it has been 24 months since the start of the epidemic. The FTU has been asking the government to come up with some temporary unemployment assistance. The Secretary talked about the need to spend 18 months for a study. And then he also said that there have been reviews and some findings have been made. So where are those review reports? And also in the latest announcement, the CE mentioned that the $10,000 that is maximum will be offered to those who are out of jobs recently. So I don't know what transpired between the two different officials in the 2021 policy address. Of course, we see the setting out of important initiatives. It doesn't mean that other issues don't have to be addressed. So we need the review of the employment ordinance, which has not been carried out for many years. We have freelancers, we have self-employed people, and even people forced to be self-employed people. And also, when we look at lockdown, say, Kwai Chung Estate, even though some people are not directly affected, the employers may still be concerned that they will be spreading the epidemic, and these people are forced to take no pay leave. And also, is it really helpful if we only have a review of the minimum wage rate once every 2 years? We usually have annual salary adjustments for other workers. But why is it that those who are on minimum wage will have to wait for 2 years for a review? And now we know that for many elderly centers, they have come up with an arrangement that make it impossible for elderly service recipients to go to the centers for daytime service. Are you going to have some sort of closed loop management for elderly centers so that even those who are receiving daycare service can still enjoy it? Well, there are 6 questions altogether. I don't think it's possible to respond to each one of them in detail. On employment assistance, yes, we have been conducting reviews, but it doesn't mean that every time we come up with a report, because we don't always commission a research body to do it every time. So there's no such thing as review reports for each review. As for the so-called pseudo self-employment or the self-employment in disguise, under the law, it's not the claim that will decide whether someone is self-employed. We'll look at the relevant characteristics of the employment arrangement. And if necessary, we can resort to the court for ruling. As for elderly services such as daycare service, in our fight against the epidemic, and for those who are in genuine need we would provide the service through other means. For example, daycare center has been, actually it has been the least affected in the past couple of years. And sometimes even the family members don't want their elders to go to the daycare center for fear of the epidemic. For the concern about cases in RCHEs, well, we are equally concerned in view of the recent surge. Together with the Department of Health, the hospital authority, we have been trying to work out effective solutions. Actually, we have to deal with the epidemic as a matter of priority, especially in the case of RCHE. We need to provide the necessary support. We'll do this to the level best of our abilities. Mr. Chu Gok-Kang. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, manpower training is a very important strategy, and planning requires a lot of time. Well, we may need to start the training at the primary or even secondary levels. Will the government look at the needs of the industries and set up a body for the task with forecasting future manpower needs, and to work with the Education Bureau for early planning in terms of curriculum and programming, so that we can keep abreast with the times, and also how can we step up the efforts for mutual recognition of qualifications with the mainland authorities. If qualifications are mutually recognized, then they can work either in Hong Kong or in the Greater Bay Area. This would be very good for the future development of the Greater Bay Area. As for the manpower requirements of different industries and different institutions, the planning for training requires cross-bureau coordination. The SAR government has been looking into the training and the future directions for certain specialties. I think, Mr. Chu, you did participate in some of those planning work in the past. What's important is how best we can coordinate the efforts. For example, we need people in the financial sector or in the professional sectors. We would need input from various bureaus and departments for that to happen. As for education, well, is it education for the purpose of education or for the purpose of training up professional people needed by employers? Is education for the purpose of personal development or for meeting industrial needs? We need to look into all these related issues. Are you set up a dedicated organization on coordination of such efforts? Well, LWB is responsible for coordination. As for different disciplines and industries, there will be the involvement of different departments and bureaus. So I'm talking about coordination. It's impossible that one organization, one dedicated organization will understand the needs of different industries and businesses. For professional training, some complicated issues have to be addressed. For example, if some local professional bodies do not recognize other qualification out of Hong Kong, then we can ask the other people to recognize our qualifications first. So we need the government has a role to play to ensure that the mutual recognition can be charted. Because under the one country, two systems principle, our involvement in the national development is also an important consideration. Mr. Kwok Ling Lai, I thank Mr. Kwok for raising some questions about manpower training. I share his views. And also, we need to look at the mutual recognition of qualifications. Some students are graduates of mainland institutions. So when they try to seek recognition of their qualifications, let's say it's a level 4. They are already level 4 qualification holders. And then they need to seek recognition again if they have another qualification later. I hope the process can be simplified. As for the special, the love upgrading special schemes, we are talking about training up manpower that we will need in the future in employment. As Mr. Chu has said, we should first of all chart the future industrial development so that training can tie in. And then young people can upgrade their skills constantly in reference to the qualification framework. In some of the love upgrading scheme programs, some are related to employment, some are not related, some are not linked to employment. I would like to know how many belong, or the percentage of the program belonging to the former category and how many to the latter category. And how many, in terms of percentage, how many are related to employment? Because we need to make sure that the trainees are getting employment as we would like to see. Because of the epidemic, many programs have been delayed or suspended, and some of the programs contain an element of practicum, so training has been affected by the current epidemic. I would like to know the arrangement that the Bureau has been made or will be made with the training bodies so that better resources allocation can be made. I don't think I can answer all those questions as Secretary for Labor and Welfare. I won't repeat the questions that already been raised and answered. As for programs linked to employment or programs not linked to employment, I would say it's half and half. Programs linked to employment tend to be longer programs, and those who are not linked to employment tend to be shorter. So in terms of numbers, there will be more short-term courses. Since 2020, we have been making some adjustments. Under the AEF 1.0, we offer assistance to relevant training bodies. Because at that time, many of the programs were offered through face-to-face programs. And then now the majority can be conducted online. And Ms. Kwok is correct. That for a small number of programs, a practicum element will be involved and the face-to-face instruction will be needed. We hope the epidemic will come to an end soon, so that the practicum sessions can continue. Because after the fourth wave of epidemic, many the training has been resumed, but the ratio between face-to-face and online instruction has changed a lot. So we allocate resources accordingly to help the training bodies. these will be kept under close review.
Mr. Kwok Wai-kang. Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. First, the FTU advocates according priority to local employment. It has to do with manpower projection. Now, another member already asked a similar question, but to my understanding, the Labour and Welfare Bureau conducts manpower projection broadly based on individual sectors without a lot of details. For example, in terms of public works projects, there have been calls for importing labor. However, we don't have detailed manpower projections. Now, of course, you would say that there is manpower squeeze because of projects overlapping with each other. But with better manpower projection, you'll be able to scout sufficient manpower locally. So can you be more specific in your future manpower projections? The second question relates to raising penalties in relation to occupational safety and health offences. The question is, without a consensus forged at the Labour Advisory Board, without not even having a sufficient discussion of the matter, the paper has now been submitted to LegCo and the labour sector has strong views on the matter. We question whether the Labour Advisory Board still plays an important role, or is it that the government has other considerations? Secretary. First, on manpower projection, this is also an important consideration in the reorganization of the government structure. Now, like Mr. Kwok said, government's manpower projection is based on a very broad basis. For example, at a macro level, we consider the manpower demand in a horizon of 10 years. Now, say in the construction industry, the Development Bureau and the Construction Industry Council collaborates in the manpower projection exercise. If necessary, they will seek the Labour and Welfare Bureau's assistance, and we join in at that stage. In future, there will be adjustments to the strategy so that we can do better. Now, on better coordination and collaboration between the Labour and Welfare Bureau and other bureaus, well, I think that there is always a run-in period. We'll continue to exchange views in the future. About the Labour Advisory Board's role in the past 4 years, now, Mr. Kwok, you may have heard my explanation in the Council many times. On government policies, we would consult the Labour Advisory Board and we respect the views of the Labour Advisory Board. However, if a consensus won't be able to be forged in the coming years at the Labour Advisory Board, then the government may need to make a decision. For example, the increase of statutory holidays from 12 to 17. Similarly, no consensus had ever been forged at the LAB. However, if we allow further discussion, then there wouldn't be a consensus even by 2030 for years to come, and it is the government's responsibility to make a decision. Of course, we will continue to consult LAB with a view to striving for a consensus. Mr. Holden Chow, am I coming through, Secretary? Yes? Thank you. I'd like to follow up on a point I previously made to you, Secretary. As far as this policy address is concerned, in terms of future manpower projections, I do have this suggestion. That is how we can make a better effort to release more women into the workforce. In fact, at the last council meeting, Secretary, you may have heard this now. Because of the epidemic, supply of foreign domestic helpers has been affected, and different stakeholders in the community have put forward different ideas. For example, whether homemakers or community nannies may be regarded as jobs as such, so that in the long run, training can be provided, and that for the unemployed and for those who aspire to join this new occupation, proper training can be provided so as to meet the demand for homemaking. If we have manpower supply, we can allow more parents in a household to work. And in that sense, we'll be able to release more women into the workforce. And according to the Scandinavian experience, they are welfare countries. But one reason, according to the study, that they could become welfare countries is because they're able to release women into the workforce and hence improving the country's economy, so that with a good economy, they'll be able to support better welfare. That's my understanding. So, Secretary, especially under the current epidemic, is it possible to conduct a longer-term manpower projection so as to provide training in terms of homemaking? Second question, a more imminent issue. Now, as you know, I also mentioned outreach teams. We have frequent testing nowadays. I wonder if outreach teams can be set up to help those residing in care homes to get tested. Because apart from elderly people, there are also disabled people and mentally incapacitated persons who may find it difficult to get tested out there. So can you set up outreach teams for that purpose, Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, about women in the workforce, it is an important topic, and that is why in 2013 and 2015, in the relevant population policy report, the government has mentioned that unleashing the potential of women in the workforce is an important matter. That is why, in terms of childcare, especially daycare childcare services, we'd like to enhance the service capacity. However, in recent years, because of the epidemic, this is at the moment not a priority, and it takes time to identify suitable locations to set up more childcare centers. I believe at the end of this month, when you receive this year's budget, you will see relevant proposals on childcare. Now, on community nannies, in the Legislative Council last term, I replied to this question many times. We have so-called full-time community nannies, and it is somewhat different from the community nannies. At the moment, at the district level, we have nannies helping out to take care of children, of families. They charge quite daily. Now, of course, we can explore providing training. However, this issue also falls within the scope of legislation on protecting children. So I think that in the future we may need to further explore this issue. On setting up outreach teams to help residents in care homes get tested, it has been an issue explored by the government at the beginning of the epidemic. However, the concern is that if an elderly or disabled resident gets infected in this closed indoor environment, and if we do not have a suitable environment to take specimens, it may exacerbate spreading of the virus. Of course, today we're still using the method of taking deep throat samples, saliva samples. There is still this risk of transmission. Under some circumstances, outreach testing teams are available, but it doesn't apply to all care homes. Mr. Yu Pak Lang. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Secretary. Now, the epidemic has disrupted our lives. It also affects our future economic development, and there will be disruptive changes to manpower demand. I have a feeling that in terms of training, talents, and manpower planning, the division of work between the Labour and Welfare Bureau and the Education Bureau is clear, but there's been little collaboration. Now, in terms of retraining, be it the ERB or the VTC, we have a feeling that these courses are quite out of date. They don't keep pace with the times. I agree with Dr. Wong Yuen-shan that you need to make sure the training courses are up to date and that the content of training should be suitable for the sector. Now, some members asked about employment-packed training courses and the proportion, and Secretary answered that is half-half. Does it mean that after completing the courses, these candidates will be required to work in that industry for some time, or is it that they only get the subsidy, complete the course, and that's it? Because we need to take a targeted approach to solve the issue of employment mismatch. If you do not take this targeted approach, it will be a waste of resources. The other point is, in relation to the Continuous Education Fund, or CEF, I think the government should put in more resources. As we all know, say for a master's program, easily it takes $200,000, $300,000 per course. If you want to encourage lifelong learning, I think the government should put in more resources. Mr. Zhou Chan, I'm sorry, Secretary. First of all, it involves manpower training and collaboration across bureaus after reorganization of the government structure. Members may know that before 2002, education and human resources and training came under one single bureau. However, the Labour and Welfare Bureau was subsequently set up, and then the bureau's portfolios were somewhat adjusted. And after reorganization of the government structure, we will consider in the future how the human resources planning and development should be taken forward. Especially, according to manpower projection, in the future, we will be experiencing labor shortage. On curriculum design, we have advisory bodies in different sectors providing information on what kind of training is needed in that particular sector so as to provide manpower for the sector. It is an important task. That is why the ERB would consult these consultative groups.
The CEF is a flexible arrangement. Actually, the training bodies will have the initiative, will enjoy the initiative to list their training programs into the coverage of the CEF. Should we offer more? Well, you will notice that in the consultation leading to the policy address, many commentators offer their views. So look at how the CEF has been utilized and taken up. We would keep things under review constantly. Mr. Chen Cho-hung. Secretary, I have a question about CITA. CITA has been up and running for many years. I hope there will be a review on the training programs to ensure that it's up to date and can meet the needs of the garment and textile industries, so that we can tie in with the trend of on either technology and the development prospects in the Greater Bay Area. I'm afraid I cannot say anything specific about the garment industry in particular today, but I can only say that we'll keep things under review closely. All right, we have a request to speak for the second time. I exercise my discretion accordingly for Dr. Wong Yuen-shan to speak. Secretary, you have agreed that in relation to pre-employment and on-the-job training of efforts expended by the Labor and Welfare Bureau and the Education Bureau in the light of the current trend of people enjoying longevity and longer working lives. So if I am not mistaken, so Secretary, are you saying that in the government restructuring, the manpower planning role under the CS4A and the importation of talent scheme administered by the Immigration Department will be subsumed and transferred to the LWB? Is there going to be some sort of consolidation? Can you elaborate on what will be done? Simply put, as I've said, in the future, the coordination, the overall coordination will be the responsibility of LWB. As for in specific industries, such as the construction industry, etc., that will be carried out, that will be the duty of individual departments. My bureau will be responsible for coordination. Okay, I'll draw the line after Mr. Zhao Xiuchong has spoken. Mr. Xiu Gafai. Well, the Secretary has not actually responded to my previous question, and that is those employees who behave, who work diligently would be worse off than those who are not. Say, for example, if they want to switch jobs, they will not get anything additionally if they resign and join a new company. I hope the Labor Department would deal with these cases more extensively, and let's see how things can be handled. Or perhaps you can tell the judge that an employee might suddenly be less obedient and less diligent in their service, this is a common occurrence in the actual employment world. Well, there are people, employees who talk about a lot about unscrupulous employers, and likewise employers may say that we should talk more about misbehaving employees. But of course, the Labor Department is duty-bound to handle the labor disputes of all sorts, including these ones. I have a follow-up question about minimum wage and the mechanism in handling minimum wage rate. I just don't see the Minimum Wage Commission as it is now can really handle this. As you can see, that you can call it a consensus, even though all labor side representatives on the commissions objected to the freeze. You should look at inflation or economic growth. Can we come up with some sort of automatic adjustment mechanism taking into account such factors? I think we have had many discussions in the past in the Manpower panel. If we have an annual review, then we may need to have something indicative, some indicators like those factors. After the latest round of review of minimum wage rate, we may need to consider the way forward, including these issues. On the question of abolition of the offsetting mechanism, I think I have to respond to what Mr. Sew's questions. I don't think we should try to overgeneralize the problems caused by a small minority of employees, because if you do something like that to your employer, you get your resume defiled and you have a bad record. It's always not a bad idea to try to do something so that you will get sacked. Well, we have the compensation mechanism for employees who have been serving the same employer for a certain period of time, so that the employee can get some compensation and tie over the period of unemployment through the severance payment or long service payment. We are talking about their entitlements here. Many members have touched on manpower today. Under point 21 of the paper, the manpower function would be transferred from the CS4A's office to the LWB. Likewise, the importation of talent will be transferred from the Security Bureau or Immigration Department to the LWB. Maybe this will be actually implemented in the next term of government, but would there be a need to have a directorate officer set up or established for such programs? The economy is not in a good shape, and still we have jobs not taken up, and we have people out of jobs at the same time. Why is it that we are still receiving calls for importation of labor, saying that there's a manpower shortage? And some people even quote the situation with the Hong Kong Games 2024. And also in the case of CLP, they have a specific kind of weathers that they would need to introduce. At that time, I, through the relevant trade unions, asked them to have a proper manpower projection for the next phase of their projects. And now we have the next phase of the project coming up, and they still want to import the special type of welding professionals for their projects. How can we prevent this? Thank you for your support. On the manpower that the LWB will be needed, the personnel that will be needed to make sure that we do a good job in coordination and in administering the introduction of talent schemes. The next CE, once elected, will be consulted on, but the broad direction that we have in mind is that if this is confirmed, we would continue to work on the creation of new posts and the deletion of some unneeded posts that we no longer needed. So this can be carried out by the current term of government. So I thank you in advance for your support, Mr. Chairman. As for other cases, we would be doing the necessary advance work on the manpower projection for different industries. All policy bureaus will have to look at its respective portfolios in regard to this manpower requirement. And for all those initiatives, related initiatives, a lot of coordination is required. It has been a major concern for the LWB in recent years, and a matter of priority for the government as a whole. Because of the epidemic, there have been changes in the supply and demand of manpower. And things may become different from what we projected some time ago. When the economy makes a turn for the better after the fourth wave, we need to make adjustments on the manpower projection. And that's a matter of concern for my bureau always. All right, that wraps up the last item. We move on to the next one. Next item, that is item 4, raising penalties of occupational safety and health legislation. It's paper CB2 76 2020 bracket 02. This is a legislation related item, so all members of the council have been invited to participate in the discussion. Time is limited. I can only extend the meeting at most for 15 minutes because this conference room will be needed for another meeting. So 3 minutes for each member, and that is questions and answers included for the 3 minutes. It's a CB2 76 2020 bracket 02. Well, I'll be brief in my introduction, Mr. Chairman, so that we can have more time for members to raise questions. Under the latest amendment proposal, and for those who have been following this, I think they all know what we are talking about. In the past decade or so, the overall occupational safety and health situation in Hong Kong has improved on the whole. But where fatalities are concerned, and for many years, we are talking about some 20 or so cases every year. This is far from ideal, we all agree. Secondly, as a matter of background, under the current legislation, if an employment is in breach of the general obligation provisions, the maximum penalty is $500,000. Under this maximum penalty provision, we notice that the actual fines imposed are on the low side. So even if there is negligence causing death of employees, the fine is usually several tens of thousands of dollars. People are saying that this is not a good deterrent.
Third, for repeated offenders, we have a high proportion, close to 30%. That is why, in light of the above, it is the community and the government's view that something should be done to enhance and raise penalties of occupational safety and health legislation. Having consulted different sectors, we have the following proposal. First, as set out in the paper, we believe that a new obligation should be introduced. Under the current legislation, only summary offences are meted out, that is, at the level of magistracy. We now propose for serious offences, we should introduce indictable offences so that cases can be taken to higher levels of court, such as the district court and even the high court. So for cases of a serious nature leading to serious consequence, we should step up deterrence. We propose to set the maximum fine at $10 million and a maximum period of imprisonment of up to 2 years. I want to explain the figure. We propose a maximum fine of $10 million because we've reviewed the legislation in Hong Kong with a financial penalty. The maximum fine is one of $10 million. We've also considered the relevant penalties meted out by countries around us. Now, if we propose a maximum fine of $10 million, we will be setting a level above that in other countries. For summary offences involving employer GD provisions, we propose to increase the maximum fine from $500,000 to $3 million, and the maximum period of imprisonment will be maintained. Now, for serious offences, under the current legislation, we only have a time bar of prosecution of up to 6 months. We propose to extend the time bar to 1 year so that for serious offences there will be sufficient time for us to collect evidence and initiate prosecution. The third area of amendment is that we have several hundred provisions under the current legislation relating to OSH, such as the requirement of wearing safety helmets in a closed area, no flame should be allowed, and we're going to review holistically these provisions and raise the penalty levels. We, in a broad sense, will divide these offences into minor, serious, and very serious offences. For very serious offences, we propose a maximum fine of $100,000 for employers. For serious offences, it's a level 6 fine, which is equivalent to $100,000. For minor offences, it's level 4, that is the current level of $25,000. Now, as far as employees are concerned, for very serious offences, the maximum fine is $150,000. For serious offences, it's pitched at level 5, $50,000, and for minor offences, level 3, that is $10,000. According to our calculation, 160 provisions will have the maximum level raised, and 70 provisions will have the seriousness level lowered, and 230 provisions will, 429 provisions will remain unchanged. Altogether, 659 provisions will be amended. There are also 38 other provisions that are not suitable for the above mentioned seriousness categorization. But we take a comprehensive approach to review these pieces of legislation. supposing that we raise the seriousness level in a broad sense, and then as far as employers are concerned, the overall increase is 2.4 times or 2.4-fold. For employee-related offences, the maximum fine will be increased to by about 2.2-fold, which is above the inflation rate throughout the period. The legislation involved has not been adjusted for over a decade, so we need to catch up with the inflation, and after doing so, we do register as a real increase in the maximum level. So perhaps I'll pause here, Chairman, and listen to members' views. Mr. Wong Kwok. Thank you, Chairman. Like the Commissioner said, we have a high level of serious OSH incidents, and the level has always remained high. And despite that, the fine level for a summary offense is on average $24,000, even for serious offenses. And over 30% of these cases involve repeated offenders. So, Commissioner, my question is, under the current legislation, it seems that we are not doing enough in terms of enforcement. How can you make sure that you will strictly enforce the law upon amendment to achieve deterrence, especially targeting repeated offenders in incidents of serious or fatal industrial accidents, so that you could give some teeth to the current legislation? Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Wong. We consulted different sectors in the past 2 or 3 years thoroughly. We are of the view that OSH offences involve not only employers and employees. And if we are to mete out corresponding penalties to achieve deterrence, we need to amend the legislation. One approach is to substantially raise the penalties of OSH legislation, so that we send a clear message to the court that for cases of the same nature, the penalty levels have now been raised substantially. Next, we will also further collaborate with the prosecution division of the Department of Justice. For example, for summary offences, we propose to extend the time bar for prosecution from 6 months to 1 year, so that we can work more diligently and collect more cogent evidence to persuade the court to mete out heavier penalties. Apart from fines, we also have another tool of punishment, and that is imprisonment. And we want to explain ourselves clear. If there is clear evidence that negligence is involved, we will step up our effort to persuade courts to mete out imprisonment as a punishment to achieve greater deterrence. But let me also explain that our objective is not to punish people. Our objective is that through raising penalties and adopting different means, we will be able to drive stakeholders to take preventive measures to prevent accidents. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Wong. Mr. Lam Chun Sing. Thank you, Chairman, members. Thank you, Commissioner, for your introduction. The audit published a report in October 17th criticizing the low penalty levels of OSH legislation. And they also recommend the Labour Department to review the existing legislation to step up deterrence. Thanks to the Audit Commission, we now have a discussion, and that the Labour Department will be reviewing the penalty levels. At first, the proposal was to peg the fine levels to the turnover of the involving companies. I understand that the SMEs may be concerned about the additional financial pressure. At the same time, the audit report suggests that deterrence should be achieved. Now, as far as the maximum level of penalty is concerned, focus is on various very serious offenses. So, very serious offenses, I think that attracts the public's attention. What is meant by reckless or intentional acts? Do you have any examples? Do these offenses constitute a high percentage? Next, about the Factories and Industrial Undertakings Ordinance, I noticed that there are changes to the financial penalties proposed for penalties for offenses relating to manwells, closed areas, toxic fumes. Now, the proposed fine will be lowered from $600,000 to $400,000. But last year, ironically, we had a number of fatal accidents involving workers in a closed area or in manholes. So I want to know whether you have measures to reduce such accidents. Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman and Mr. Lam. According to the paper we've provided, we have quoted 4 cases. Like Mr. Lam said, upon amending the legislation, there will be another new category of very serious offenses leading to very serious consequences. And that is why we propose to allow indictable offenses to be created so that the matter can be taken to high levels of the court. And according to the case statistics, not many cases belong to this category. Anyway, in Annex 3, we have provided 4 cases. Some involve major construction projects, whereas some involve a very or minor works such as household decoration involving bamboo scaffolding. In the domestic unit, the key is that not only employers should be responsible. Whenever there is gross negligence or omission, total negligence of seriousness of the act, then both the involved employers and employees may be punished. Second, as you know, in these cases of a serious nature, some workers died as a result. So this is how serious offenses will be handled. Second, Mr. Lam may have noticed that under the Factories and Industrial Undertakings Ordinance, FIUO, we have different provisions with different penalties. Some involve closed areas. However, our approach this time is to take different provisions, and we have divided them into different categories. For enclosed areas, we list them as very serious offenses. The current penalty level is $500,000. The $200,000. We propose to increase the level by 100% to $400,000, so that for very serious offenses and minor offenses, we will propose the same rate of increase. After rounds of consultation, we understand that there are divergent views. But at the end of the day, we have to make a decision. So for very serious offenses, serious and minor offenses, the level of adjustment is such that we need to achieve our objective. In fact, we are proposing an increase of multiple folds. That is, inflation aside, there will still be an increase of more than 1-fold. We believe this will achieve a sufficient deterrence.
Mr. Zhao Xiuchong. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner. For the fatal incidents, there were 20 or so every year. We haven't got the statistics for the last year, but the feeling in the industry is that there will be some 30 cases, especially for those that occur near the end of the year. It's so appalling. It's because of there was the framework accident and scaffold accident killing 2 workers. It's very sad. According to the government paper, there are some reference information from Australian, 22 million for Australia, Canada 9 million, Singapore 3 million. I don't think we should compare the $10 million fine proposed by the government with those fines, because we are talking about general obligations. Generally, the maximum is $500,000, 500,000, and even the government's proposal would just increase it to 3 million. And also the actual fines imposed were very low. We joke about that a life will be worth $20,000, which is very absurd. And it said that there were a case involving imprisonment, but that there was a sentence to be served out with other imprisonment terms. But so in terms of imprisonment, there is no message here for the court. You're not proposing any change. And also let's talk about the consultation. The commissioner talks about several rounds of consultation. I was aware of the first round. I was involved. The conclusion back then would be to increase the fines to 10% of business turnover. And then it was later lowered to $15 million. I'm aware of that. So how many trade unions have you consulted in those rounds of consultation? Can you tell us? I noticed that you haven't consulted the Labor Advisory Board. You talk about consulting trade organizations and trade unions and labor organizations. I note that the Labor Advisory Board did not come to a consensus concerning lowering the maximum fine to $10 million. I don't think the government should continue to introduce this change despite the objection from the board. What are you going to do to really listen to the views of the labor side? I hope members can be mindful of the speaking time limit so that we can have some time for the commissioner to respond to your questions. Last year, we have 25 fatal accidents related to employment, 24 in the construction industry. As for comparing Hong Kong with other countries in relation to employers' general obligations, yes, social circumstances are different, but their fine levels are good reference for us in the future. We are talking about 3 million maximum fine for the summary proceedings, but for indictment it's 10 million. So we cannot just compare the 3 million fine we are proposing with other countries. But I'm saying that in this regard, we are imposing a higher fine. We are the highest in the Asian region, but we are just somehow a little bit lower than that of New Zealand. And also the time bar, we've extended from 6 months to 1 year. that would be beneficial in our attempt, in our efforts to persuade the court to introduce heavier penalties, including imprisonment in certain cases. The Labour Advisory Board plays a very important role in all employment-related issues. We have been talking to different trade unions and labor organizations for many rounds, and also to the Legislative Council. We understand members of this council are very concerned about the issues. That's why we take this first opportunity to come to talk to you. I can assure you that we'll continue to facilitate the discussion, the exploration of this issue in the Labour Advisory Board, so as to bring the labor side and the employer side together. Well, after Mr. Lee Chan-kung has spoken, I'll have to conclude this item. And secondly, I have to enforce the 3-minute rule strictly. I'm going to stop you after you have spent more than 3 minutes. And if you use up all the 3 minutes, there will be no time for the Commissioner to respond. The 3 minutes will be for both questions and answers. Mr. Siu Ka-fai, in the past, the maximum fine was $500,000. People ask why the judge always imposed just a fine of a few tens of thousands of dollars. Might be the fault was not entirely the employers, and there was some contributory fault on the part of the employee. And we haven't increased the maximum fine for more than 20 years. Of course, there's a case to increase it. But if you increase it from $500,000 to $10 million, it's a 20-fold increase. You have to consider this from the perspective of ordinary businessmen. We're not just talking about the construction industry, but all people in business will be affected. Let's say I have a platform erected outside my office on the 4th or 5th floor, and then there's a canvassing worker trying to come out to work, and I have reminded the canvassing worker to have a safety harness, and if the employee doesn't heed my advice and then fell to his death, would I be fined $10 million because of the negligence on my part? Then all businessmen will be concerned about the liability, the maximum fine. Mr. Chow said that there was no consensus at the Labour Advisory Board. So why propose this without any consensus in the board? And if you would pack the fine to business turnover, and we were talking about the CLP, well, you have a very hefty fine imposed on the big company like CLP. And even if you have insurance coverage, it's not helpful. It's just like fire insurance. But the insurance coverage is not comprehensive. Are you saying that businessmen should set aside $10 million before they start a business? I have to stress again that we're talking about how we should deal with very serious cases involving series of negligence and which leads to fatal cases. There are very few of them. We're talking about very serious cases here. So in terms of the legislative intent, there's no change. We're using the same system, just that the maximum fine is going to be increased. Maybe I can also supplement on behalf of the Commissioner. Don't think that this would apply to all companies. We're talking about very serious cases, and the company in question must be very, very big before they will be getting a fine of $10 million. Don't think that this is going to apply to SMEs. So that's what I want to say to supplement what the Commissioner has already said. Dr. Lo Wai-kok, I think in my constituency would always say that safety should come first. The industry has been very serious in enhancing safety. For example, we should have introduced a good management system and use the latest technology to monitor the works. And also there should be alternative construction methods introduced, such as using prefabricated elements. And also some work should be carried out by the robots or through other automation processes, so that manual labor can be spared from very dangerous processes. So for the employers and the frontline workers, they should come together and create a safe working environment. The industry agrees that there is a case in adjusting the maximum fine, and in some cases, the fines actually imposed were on the low side. But if you say that when it's indictment, then the maximum fine is $10 million and 2 years imprisonment. And we're not just talking about the employer, but also the management people, the professional people involved. So this, I think, is subject to disputes and other views. So I also got a doubt about the consultation and the comprehensiveness of the consultation. So I'll leave some time to the Commissioner for these issues. The member is correct that under the mechanism on occupational safety and health, publicity, enforcement, and introduction of technology, it would be best to do something in preparation in advance and to introduce new technology. But apart from prevention work and publicity, we need to also have the full set. We need to have the legislation as well. People are of the view that the maximum fines are not really good deterrent. The question is, to what extent should the fines be increased? So we have consulted the stakeholders for 2 years now. It's time for the government to come to a decision. Having heard the opinion of different sectors, we are now proposing to set it at the maximum level in other laws in Hong Kong. That is $10 million. Dr. Lo Wai-kok, I'm sorry, we have to move on. Mr. Kwok Wai-kok, Chairman, am I through? Okay. This is my question. As the Commissioner has said, for members who have been following up the issues, they understand what this is about. Otherwise, other members may be so-called barking up the wrong tree. As we can see from the Manpower panel paper, one of the heated issues is the indictable offense processes for very serious cases. In the paper, at first, in 2019, the government proposed that the fine should be pegged to 10% of business turnover, or 6 million. And then in 2020, the government said, occupational safety and health matters have become the long-standing problem, so there's a need to increase the level to $50 million. And the 10% business turnover was no longer mentioned, but it said that the sentencing would take that into account. The business turnover will be taken into account in imposing fines, so that SMEs will not be fined $10 million. But because of the rumors spreading around by the business sector, people are saying that the fines will be very hectic. And now the government is saying that it should be $10 million. So we have coming through a roller coaster process of 15 million, and then now it's 10 million. Well, human lives are valuable beyond monetary considerations. Why do we have such up and down swings by the government? What has the Labor Department got hold of in deciding such different levels, so that people would not doubt that the government is yielding to business sector pressure?
Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your questions. In setting the penalty level, especially in relation to the newly proposed penalty level for indictable offences, indeed there have been divergent views between the employer sector and the labour sector. The Labour Department, therefore, has to be pragmatic in deciding the level of penalty to achieve deterrence. Now, we have referred to a number of indicators. For example, the maximum fine allowed under the current Hong Kong legislation. Then the maximum fine at the moment is $10 million. We also refer to the practices in neighboring countries and their relevant penalty levels. In addition, we need to have regard to the actual situation. That is, we have a high percentage of SMEs in Hong Kong. Close to 90% of construction companies have a monthly turnover of below 10 million. Over 80% of construction companies had annual turnover of below 5 million. That is why we propose the penalty levels. Dr. Priscilla Leung. Chairman, am I coming through? Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to speak my mind on this matter. We helped a lot of employees and SMEs. Whenever an industrial accident happens, this is very much we hope to avoid. Litigation may last for a long time, leading to a lose-lose situation because of the setting of the current legislation. Now, the proposal offers more protection to employees so that in the event of an accident, he will receive damages more easily, and that this will be adjusted according to the inflation level. I find it acceptable. However, in terms of the substantial increase in the level of penalty, I'm concerned about SMEs. For large major enterprises, I think they will survive. Say in the case of lift falling within several hours, they could work out a compensation package. Whereas for SMEs, if the increase is now jumped to $10 million, I think it's too big a leap. I think we should avoid being confrontational. Now, for SMEs and micro establishments, very often they just share the same boat with their fellow employees. The micro establishments don't earn much, so we need to explain the background. For example, instead of having a leap to $10 million, you can work out another proposal, because otherwise these enterprises would go bankrupt. Especially, we're in the midst of the epidemic. I don't think this is the most appropriate time to roll out this measure. Many SMEs are already in dire straits, and they might decide to fold up once and for all. And for startups, you need to think in their shoe, put yourself in their shoe. And you also need to consider this in your legislative proposal. For gross negligence, yes, indictable offences should be created. And in the past, some defendants were sent to jail. That happens to unscrupulous employers, but I don't think all employers who... I'm sorry, the 3 minutes are up. We need to observe the time limit very strictly. I'll move on to another member. The Commissioner can give you a reply later. Mr. Jeffrey Lam. Thank you, Chairman. I don't accept the suggestion that there is any intentional vilification going on. Like Commissioner said, the government consulted some stakeholders, but it's not an extensive consultation. There is no consensus, and there is no way we can stop the government's decision. I agree with other members that we should avoid even a single accident from happening. But in fact, both parties are responsible, employers and employees alike, and it's unfair to just punish employers. Very often, because of the employees' frolic on its own, these accidents happen, and it is not the case of just personal injury at work. Employees suffer losses as well. And Commissioner, we have told you many times, and you have not considered these points. Now, about the Hong Kong GCC's position, for very serious offences, the indictable offences can be created so as to raise a maximum fine to $10 million. The Hong Kong GCC has great reservations. There is no consensus. The excessive fine would only cause enterprises to fold up and other employers to ignore OSH. Now, for prosecution under Summary Offences Ordinance, the maximum penalty level would be increased to $3 million and $150,000 respectively for employees and for employers and employees. Again, the Hong Kong GCC is opposed to the idea because it's not confined to the construction industry. It applies to SMEs as well, and also other sectors of the economy bearing higher risks. For SMEs without means, which cannot afford long-term litigation, it's unfair to them. And I don't think SME employers and employees will be able to afford the fine. For prosecution initiated on a summary basis, the time bar for issuing summons will be extended from 6 months to 1 year, and the Hong Kong GCC is perplexed because for summary offences, normally the collection of evidence is not a complex task. And employers will be required to shoulder the additional operational costs in a disproportionate manner, and it creates low efficiency. In fact, any accidents involving fatalities or injuries should be dealt with as soon as possible. I'll try to allow all members to speak. Several members have indicated their wish to speak, but at 10:45 we have another policy briefing by the Constitutional and Affairs panel. So if there is no objection, I'll allow the meeting to go on to allow everyone a chance to speak. Next, Ms. Kwok Ming Lai. Thank you, Chairman. I fully agree with what Mr. Lam said, because as far as OSH legislation is concerned, we're not only concerned about the construction industry. The SMEs do not have a high awareness of OSH, so the government should first step up publicity and education. Even for the safety card for construction workers, only 1 day training is offered. Is it sufficient? Because usually serious or fatal accidents happen at construction sites. Now, as far as construction is concerned, we need to be concerned with safety during the maintenance period. Now, there is a systematic issue. After contracting out public works projects, the SMEs or micro establishments will be responsible. So I think a comprehensive legislative review should be taken. So these are the 3 points I'd like to raise. Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Just a short reply. Dr. Priscilla Leung made a point about SME's concern of the proposed 10 million maximum fine. The suggestion is that for indictable offences of a very serious nature, the maximum fine of 10 million will apply, and the serious or very serious offences involve gross negligence leading to serious consequences. I'd like to reassure SMEs not to worry, because you need to have both elements. You need to have gross negligence and a very serious consequence. About the indictable offences and $10 million maximum fine, we propose that the court should refer to the turnover of the enterprise concerned. Mr. Jeffrey Lam made some comments and reflected the view of the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce, General Chamber of Commerce, but I want to emphasize that under the OSH legislation we have provisions targeting employers as well as provisions targeting employees at fault. So it's very clear. If there is an incident relating to OSH, we will prosecute the offending employers as well as employees. As you have noticed, we have increased the prosecution efforts against employees, as they are also responsible. About Ms. Kwok Ming Lai's comment, like what I explained just now, for SMEs, we have a special provision. That is, the court should, when metering out judgment, refer to the business or turnover of SMEs. Are we contracting out responsibilities as well? Of course, the answer is no. We have subcontracting arrangements for construction projects. In fact, layers of subcontracting. But when something goes wrong, we'll pursue liability not with the immediate subcontractor, but further up the chain as well. In any case, after contracting out the works, the duty holder will still be ultimately responsible. Mr. Lee Chen-kang. Thank you, Chairman. Many members have this consensus that accidents are one too many. So, Mr. Lee Chen-kang, so my first point is, if you have the penalty proposal as such, do you envisage a substantial drop in the number of accidents? I don't think increasing the maximum penalty corresponds to reducing the number of accidents. For the Labour Department to enhance occupational safety and health, if you could make an extra effort, you will suppress the number of accidents. However, you kept on harping about employers, employees, and I think this will create a bigger problem of manpower shortage. There is an issue with IT replacing manual jobs. There is also this other issue of putting a sword over the head of both employers and employees. My question is, for offending employers and employees, once they're convicted by the court, by criminal court, will civil damages be pursuable?
I'd like to clarify something to you. I think you are saying something quite the opposite. You are saying that any accident is one too many, right? Correct. If we are to improve occupational safety and health, we cannot just rely on imposing higher fines. We need to do more publicity, we do more prevention, and we need to do a better job in enforcement and prosecution. And for the construction industry, we should come up with better working arrangements and make better preparation and prevention of accidents. But on the other hand, if the fines are not good deterrents, that would affect other efforts. That's why we are proposing increasing the penalties, especially for very serious offenses. We need to make sure that they are good deterrents, not that we want to get the fines, we want to impose the fines. But it's because the incentive to implement good prevention may be diminished if the fines are not good enough. So we look at the strategies, we'll monitor the effectiveness of our strategies all the time and make improvements when needed. I would say that the employer and the employee need not worry. It's not that we want to impose heavy fines on them. That everyone knows what we need to do. Introduce the necessary preventive measures, give workers safety harness and safety helmets, etc. It's important that everyone should put safety first and do whatever is necessary to ensure safety is instilled in the overall work culture. That will require efforts from all sides. As I've said, Mr. Lee Chan-kung is the last member to speak. But well, now we have another one, so I will give Maggie 1 minute to say what she would like to say. Safety is important, so I have to declare my interest. As a lawyer, I have been helping construction companies and workers alike. I agree with Mr. Jeffrey Lam, and also I agree with Dr. Lo Wai Kwok and Mr. Siu Ka-fai in relation to one particular issue. The maximum fines may be set at very high levels, but the fines imposed by the judge might not be high. Would you introduce a range, a fine which is a range, instead of increasing the maximum fines, so as to prevent fines from being on the very low side? And would you also consider packing the fine to the business turnover subject to a maximum? And also, we may not be talking about a super big company when you impose a 10 million fine in relation to very serious offenses, because you are going to prosecute all the contractors and subcontractors, so some of them are really SMEs. All right. I think time doesn't allow more members to speak, so I will be the last one to speak. Commissioner, I think we have a consensus in that we all attach importance to safety. But some people in the community, including some members here, are not very clear about what the government is proposing. There may be a difference in how things are perceived. So consensus may be difficult. For serious offenses, if it's an indictment, the maximum fine is $10 million. The labor sector is disappointed about the sudden reduction from 50 million to 10 million in terms of maximum fine. But some people in the community also misunderstand what this is about. Some are concerned unnecessarily about affordability. Can you give us some actual instances so as to indicate to us what is likely to be involved if a $10 million fine is imposed? How serious is the recklessness or negligence will be involved? Or would it be only be imposed on the repeated offenders? So that you can illustrate that this is about having good deterrent effect instead of causing the fear. We have 4 cases for illustration in the paper. If we had at that time an indictment, choice of indictment, we would have prosecuted the case through indictment. There are big and small projects involved. For example, case 3 is using a scaffold for construction, repair and maintenance, or for air conditioning work. Of course, we're talking about why this is serious. Because nothing was done for safety. The worker was not fully trained, and it was high above on a very high level of a building. They just use a mountain climbing rope for the job, and then the worker fell to his death. The employer did nothing to prevent the accident. So if anything happened, anything untoward happened, the worker would certainly be killed. So, and then the breadwinner of the family of the worker was killed in this incident. There's a platform at a very high level and all of debris. When it was time to clear away the debris, and there was no assessment on whether the platform could hold the tons of the debris to be cleared. There was no safety prevention measures. And then there was an accident, the platform couldn't hold the tons of debris and the workers, and the workers fell to their death with the debris when the platform succumbed. So they did not assess whether the platform could have the holding capacity. So I thank you for giving me this opportunity to explain what we are trying to do. We are only talking about very serious cases here. Well, your answer is not thorough enough in my view. You are trying to tell us what are, in your view, serious cases which will be subject to the indictable court proceedings. So I was asking you what cases will warrant a $10 million fine, and what kind of business turnover would be like for a company to be subject to a fine of $10 million. So we may not be talking about an actual scenario, maybe a hypothetical scenario, so that people can have some inkling about what it would be like if a $10 million fine would be imposed. Otherwise, people will think that this could be imposed in any case, in a lot of cases. Well, as the government can impose or introduce a maximum fine in the legislation, but the actual fine imposed is decided by the court. So we cannot really talk about a hypothetical situation whereby the $10 million fine would be warranted. We were saying that the court will have to make reference to the business turnover. So instead of saying that the company must be a very big company, we are saying that the business turnover would be a good reference for the judge. In other words, for SMEs with a business turnover of hundreds of thousands of dollars or lower, then it's something that the court would need to refer to in the consideration. I think that's about it for today. AOB. Do we have any AOB item here? Dr. Priscilla Leung said she would like to supplement her views, but maybe she's now in the CAP meeting. Maybe she would like to submit her views in writing. So if there's nothing under AOB, meeting's now adjourned.